So, I am not a crier at all. My parents taught me from an early age that crying was weak and shameful and would only be met with disapproval or dismissal. I had already met my crying quota of twice a year when I started reading The Remains of the Day. The funny thing is, my friend Mike, with whom I've shared an affinity for everything horror since high school, is the one who recommended this book to me. "It was the most beautiful and agonizing thing I've read this year," he said. "The absolute best use of first-person narrative I've ever seen. Character is so perfectly realized, and as you get what is really happening, a split second before the narrator, it destroys you." This was not typical Mike fare, at least not based on what we characteristically recommended to each other. The last book we discussed was Nick Cutter's The Deep, a terrifying, psychological, and somewhat dystopian thriller that freaked out Stephen King. I was a bit shaken by Mike's acknowledgement that he'd read something that affected him on a profoundly emotional level. Our relationship had never been built on heartfelt sharing. Even though we spent a lot of time together in high school, we mainly spent that time watching movies like High Tension, The Descent, or Hostel. Over the years, as we live in different states, in different worlds, messages were often "just saw the guest, highly recommend," or "you have to see It Follows right now." These were usually followed up with very little. Maybe "you were right, I loved it," or "thanks for the rec, great performances, loved the concept," or simply "super creepy." I always followed through on his suggestions, though, because I knew that if he liked it, so would I. While it wasn't a horror novel or film, something about his connection to this particular book suspended any other review, positive or negative, that either made me want to read it or kept me away from it in the past. Mike's recommendation convinced me beyond a doubt that not only would I read it immediately, but I would also have the same profound response. While I would find strong footing in the novel, it did not occur right away. The story starts sluggishly, echoing a British butler's ostensibly menial duties. I actually wondered at first whether Mike was just trolling me, as I had never known his taste to be particularly subtle, quiet stories, and our typical interactions involved throwing various sarcastic barbs at each other and engaging in droll repartee. However, after about 20 pages, I realized that he had been in earnest in his assertions, as it became clear that the butler in question, Mr. Stevens, ardently believed that his 35-year service to two gentlemen had been a proud enterprise worth his entire life's dedication. Though Stevens, who is our first-person narrator, does not see in himself, we learn that he has never truly lived for his own desires, to the point where he even struggles with making the decision to take a brief trip to visit a housekeeper he has not seen in years. The first moment that brought me to tears is one that Stevens remembers as he attempts to define the term dignity, something every butler strives to embody. His mind drifts to a particularly taxing dinner party during which over 18 guests, all with their own servants, are in attendance. This alone is the presumed trial he must overcome. That is, until Stevens casually reveals that this was also the night his father died. While Stevens is constantly asked to provide more bandages for a man's feet, account for another man's deceptive behavior, and seriously, teach one stranger's son about the birds and the bees before the young man's wedding day, Miss Kenton, the aforementioned housekeeper, fervently reminds Stevens that his father has gone very poorly and that he would like a word with his son. When he is back downstairs, Miss Kenton quietly reveals just minutes later that his father has died. Stevens thanks her, returning stoically, as he sees it, to his duties. However, while he maintains order at the party, which must always go on, he cannot prevent his body's betrayal, as several guests ask him if he's all right and whether he is crying. This does not, of course, prevent them from asking more of him as the night continues, and Stevens insists that his behavior is merely the strains of a hard day. This scene ended with Stevens affirming that this night, for all its sad associations, was one he recalls with a large sense of triumph, because for him, he passed the test. I set the book down and thought about this for a long time and could not hold back tears, even though I had to stifle them to a degree to avoid waking my husband. However, the next morning as I drove to school, the mere remembrance of the scene destroyed me, as Mike warned it would, and I broke down once again, this time with more abandon. Once I finished the book, I cried again, this time directly in front of my friend Charles. While I apologized, completely embarrassed, he encouraged me to let it out, which is not a direction I'm used to, and asked me why I felt so deeply about the character's life. I considered this for some time. I have a fairly good relationship with my father, who's still alive, and I feel like my chosen occupation reaps rewards on multiple levels every day. I often take opportunities to try new things, sometimes just for myself. I do tend to empathize with characters very strongly, but regarding a more personal connection, I was puzzled. But then I thought, maybe the personal connection lies with who drove me to read this book in the first place. As I continued to cry, I explained to Charles that I hadn't actually seen Mike in 10 years. That sometimes our only communication was, "You should watch Martyrs. That really messed me up." Or, "You shouldn't watch a Serbian film. That really messed me up." I hadn't stopped to think about all the times he had come over last minute just to watch a movie or talk about whatever. That one time I had driven up to JMU with a homemade birthday cake for my friend Stephanie, and halfway there I'd realized I'd forgotten my wallet and had just enough gas to either get there or go home, and I called up Mike to ask him, "Hey, wants the birthday cake?" I hadn't taken the time to reminisce about these many moments in a long time, and I'm so grateful that I have them, and I'm grateful for all that Mike has given me as a friend. We've already discussed many more books in just this past week that we've either enjoyed or plan to read, and I look forward to many more of these deeper discussions, as well as more dissections of horror movies. None would be as good without Mike's 2 cents. And I'm also looking forward to many times in the future when I can say, "Thanks for the book recommendation, Mike. It really messed me up."